Okay, welcome everyone. Depending on where you are in the world, good morning, afternoon, or evening. I'm Maria Volpe. I'm a professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice at the City University of New York. I also run the the CUNY Dispute Resolution Center. These breakfasts are co-sponsored each month by the Association for Conflict Resolution of Greater New York and the City University of New York Dispute Resolution Center at John Jay College. This morning is our 289th gathering since 9/11. We used to meet in person at John Jay College until April 2020, and since then we have been meeting online. These breakfasts are convened and facilitated each month by a wonderful committee that I'm a part of, including Matthew Latimer, Nikki Borofsky, Kirsten Pugh, and Chloe Choi. These breakfasts, we used to always meet over coffee and bagels, so we continue to call them breakfasts. They're round tables. At this point, are recorded. The recordings are posted on the websites for ACRGMY and the CUNY Dispute Resolution Center. They are also posted on YouTube. Nikki will put that information in the chat so that you can click on our recorded history. This morning, we're so delighted to have with us Jim Melamed. I've known Jim forever. I can remember when you first got started, Jim, and it seemed to be such cutting edge work that you were doing way back then when you started Mediate.com. So it's such a pleasure to have you here with us this morning. To more formally introduce Jim, I'm going to turn it over to Nikki Borofsky. Take it away, Nikki.
Thank you, Maria. So welcome everybody to our 289th Roundtable Breakfast for July 2025. Today, our guest is Jim Melamed, who's really a pioneer. And his work has not only tracked the intersection of conflict resolution and technology, but it has often anticipated it, nudged it along, and occasionally built the very infrastructure upon which it rests from scratch. Jim co-founded Mediate.com in 1996 and served as its CEO for 25 years. He now chairs the board of Resourceful Internet Solutions, the parent company of Mediate.com, Arbitrate.com, and ODR.com. But his contributions go back even farther. In 1983, he launched the Mediation Center in Eugene, Oregon, where he joined us from at the very wee hours of the morning now, at a time when mediation was still being hammered out on typewriters with whiteout and correction tape. He went on to lead the Mediation Association in Oregon and the Academy of Family Mediators, helping to shape the professional community before ODR was even a term. His academic training, a degree in psychology from my alma mater, Stanford, and a law degree from the University of Oregon, run throughout his work. And it's really visible, the blend of structural clarity and psychological insight that is really helping to define his contributions to mediation theory, practice, and platform building. Today's session, Optimizing Online Mediation, Balancing Automation, AI, and the Human Touch, invites us to reflect on where we are in this arc of technological change. Over the last 5 years, online mediation has gone from optional to essential. I read a statistic saying that about 70% of mediations, at least, were being conducted online these days. But AI introduces a qualitatively new challenge. Unlike earlier tools, email, scheduling platforms, even Zoom that we're on here, AI interacts with the very substance of conflict. It's not just how we communicate, but what gets communicated and what's proposed as a possible resolution. Jim will walk us through this shift, a history of disruptive technologies, from computer to internet to the rise of the current moment, where tools like ChatGPT, Notebook LM, and Pickaxe are very real options in our world. He doesn't just showcase the tools. He is going to invite us to examine their impact on process, on ethics, on presence, and of our understanding of what it means to be a human in the room these days. He is going to reframe this moment. Mediation has always been, interestingly, prompt driven. We as mediators ask layered, open-ended, intentional questions, not to get the answer, but to open up possibility and potential resolution. So in some senses, as mediators, we're already prompt engineers, and we've been doing it as humans for decades. So now the question is, how are we going to carry this skill forward? How are we going to frame, listen, guide, and hold complexity? This is a new landscape where AI is also in the room, as seen by the auditors and the transcription and recording services that are in this very meeting with us now. These tools and entities can inform rather than decide. And with care, they may even help parties resolve and reach more thoughtful, creative, and sustainable understandings. Jim, the floor is yours. Please welcome me, or join me in welcoming, I'm sorry, Jim Melamed to the floor. You have the Zoom room.
Thanks, Nikki. And of course, you're perfectly on time. Thanks to Maria, thanks to Kirsten, thanks to Nikki for setting this up. And what a miracle it is that we're all able to get together online. The miraculousness of it was brought home to me when we were going to have Mediate.com's 25th anniversary conference in Oregon for 150 people that got called off because of the pandemic. And as a substitute, we not only had 150 people online, we ended up with over 800 people online from 37 countries. And that really opened my eye to some of the opportunities that are available to us, literally to have worldwide conversations. It's really unbelievable and a great boon for the world of mediation. And what a miracle that all of this came together with Zoom and the like during the pandemic, so that we as private mediators and court mediation programs remarkably were able to continue their good work. And it was, I wish I would have come up with that as an exercise during my 30 years of training. I never thought to say, imagine that you couldn't physically get together. How would you mediate online if that was the only option? And that was the opportunity that the pandemic presented, and probably expedited development of online mediation by a decade or two by needing to rise to that challenge. So I would like to suggest, in fact, that even if we get together with folks physically, that's still an online case. And we want to do everything as well as we possibly can online. They read about mediation, they found us online, they contacted us, we got our appointment, we get our payment, hopefully, online. And even if we get together, it's also an online mediation. Okay? But remarkably, the data is that between 70 and 80% of current mediations are, in fact, taking place exclusively online, which is remarkable, remarkable. And I think there haven't been thorough studies done, but for many users, for many participants, it's a preference. It's much more nimble. They don't have to take off work. They don't have to get daycare. We can have shorter meetings. We don't have to block out hours or a half day or the like. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the past and the incremental development that has taken place. I will say this is the most exciting time technically that I've experienced since 1988, when John Healy, this is 8 years before the commercial internet, John Healy and I were trying to sell email addresses. And people would say, well, God, it sounds really interesting, but who would I communicate with? And in fact, as we got started, there weren't too many people that were online. And initially, they were proprietary networks, Prodigy, CompuServe, eventually America Online. And all of this development, email addresses, bulletin boards, and the like, literally took years to get a critical mass online. And then really America Online did popularize it. And it was on January 1, 1996, the first day of the commercial internet, the .coms being authorized, that Mediate.com opened up. I'm going to suggest that while there has been lots and lots of incremental technical development over the years, there has never been anything as big as AI. AI is so big that now, if we want to develop better technology, who do we ask? We ask AI. And if we want to go ahead and develop code, who do we ask? We ask AI to at least take a first crack at developing the code for us. So I was going to say that resistance is futile, but I scratched that off my pad, and I just like to suggest that AI is in fact a part of the air we now breathe. It's impacting us whether we want it or not. And the big difference is that, for 35, 40 years, we've been building digital plumbing, if you will, email, attachments, websites, forms, surveys, track changes, DocuSign, you name it. We've been building better and better digital plumbing. But what's new about AI is it doesn't only concern itself with that digital plumbing, it concerns itself with all the information that's going through the plumbing. For the first time, we have a technical advancement that actually goes to the substance of the discussions and can, well orchestrated, contribute positively in an empowering way to those conversations. So we'll be talking about AI and its impact on the content of discussions. I also want to just say what a blessing it is that we work in the world of mediation, because nothing we talk about here today changes the fact that parties retain complete decision-making control. Nothing will be imposed on them. It's a confidential discussion. Nothing will be held against them. And what a joy it is to work with AI in this context, as opposed to, for example, if we were an arbitrator or a judge and we're actually responsible for coming up with the decision. Then we get into a whole lot of additional issues, transparency, bias, and the like. But in the world of mediation, I'm going to suggest to you that, number one, AI will help us administratively with a number of tasks. But critically, the AI is opening us to new ideas. It's an idea generator. That's its best role. It's our consultant as we're mediating. It's an additional voice at the table. Previously, all the facilitative guidance would come from the mediator's mouth. But now I'm going to suggest that people can access additional information and voices. And there's sometimes an advantage that we're able to separate that out from the mediator's voice. So I think that, a couple more things here. One thing that I've noticed is a really fascinating overlap between questioning, which, as a mediator, it's been said the ideal mediator would do nothing but ask questions. The reason there, perhaps, is that it keeps us out of providing the answer. Okay. But, mediation's always been about eliciting the solutions from the folks and having a conversation. And the real cool overlap with AI is the concept of prompting. Okay. So when we're looking for information from an AI engine, The critical issue is, what are we asking for? Very specifically, what's the articulation of our prompt or our inquiry? Okay. And in this regard, I find an interesting overlap between AI and mediation, where we're all based on the quality, timeliness, and effectiveness of the inquiries, the questions that we make. And we'll find that that precision as to our inquiries is going to be helpful relative to prompting with AI. Also, I want to clarify something for myself. I used to be a big fan of NLP. NLP used to be neuro-linguistic programming, and we would learn to identify people's primary communicational system. Is it visual? Is it auditory? Is it kinesthetic? And we would tailor our language and our presentation, even our posture, perhaps, based on that understanding of how they process information. Well, while that is all still, I think, relevant online, NLP now has a new definition. It's kind of been hijacked a little bit, if you will. Now it's called natural language processing. And this is one of the coolest things in working with AI is we don't need to be a programmer. We don't need to be a coder. We can use our everyday natural language to precisely ask for what we want. And that is how the system works. In fact, remarkably, one of the professions that is now most at risk is coders, is programmers, because we can ask the AI to come up with a first crack at doing the coding and the programming. It's actually improved my life a lot to not have to always explain things to programmers, which are not always easy to do. But coders, obituary writers, my first exposure to AI was writing obituaries. And if you go to the memorial section of Mediate.com, my last 5 obituaries were dominantly written by ChatGPT. And it was amazing. I would take a minute or two, put in the effective prompts that I would know for this particular now deceased person, and submit. 20 seconds later, I'm getting a blowaway obituary. Now, I still need to read it. When you're working with AI, you need to take ownership over the ultimate output, the ultimate result. But boy, it put me right on the 2-yard line. I change a word or two, I add a link or two, and there we go. So much so that my boss, Colin Rule, called me the next morning after one, said, "Wow, that was an amazing obituary. How'd you do that?" I had the wife of a deceased fellow colleague and mediator, good friend, who called me up the next day and said, "That was the most unbelievable obituary." Now, I didn't share with them how that had been developed. It's an interesting ethical question of whether I should, given that I wasn't in my professional role at that moment. But for coders, for obituary writers, and who else is really at risk? Our attorneys. Okay. And similar for attorneys, the attorneys that are willing to embrace AI, to consider it, to utilize it where wise and effective, those are the attorneys that are going to survive. The attorneys that try to ignore it and just pretend it doesn't exist, they have a limited lifespan. And it's analogous for mediators, I would suggest. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share, if that works. We'll see. And Maria or Nikki, could you give me a thumbs up if you can see we're good?
You're
It
good.
looks good.
Good. All right. So really what we're talking about is optimizing online mediation. And I'm suggesting to you that there are 3 primary elements: automation, AI, and what I'll call the human touch. And we're going to now talk about the continuing evolution of mediation. And we'll see if we can get this Good. All right. So I mediated my first case in 1983 using a typewriter, my first few cases. And this was the world then. Pink slips, carbon paper, phones to places, not to people. Okay. Mimeograph machines. Um, in terms of one of the phenomena that's taking place that's very hard to describe or wrap your head around is the accelerating pace of technical development. And just to put in a couple of data points, the typewriter was invented around 1847 by Remington. It was the 1950s, over 100 years later, where they invented whiteout or liquid paper. Okay. We're talking 100 years to develop whiteout. We wouldn't tolerate that today. Most notably, back in the day, we were completely reliant in America on the Postal Service. So we would come up with our best hard copy draft or whether it's an agreement, correspondence, it would need to be put in the mail that they would receive 3 or 4 days later. And in fact, our cadence of meeting was very much dependent on the turnaround time for them to receive and consider the documents. Okay. Needless to say, that has all changed. So first few cases, I'm on a typewriter. People want to make a change. I feel like I'm going to have a coronary. Basically you're retyping pages or using a whole lot of whiteout, okay, until the first miracle happened, which was the dedicated word processor. Suddenly we could infinitely edit our work product, save all of our work, and come up with options and multiple drafts and the like. I believe that word processing was a necessary step for the modern mediation movement. It liberated the movement and dedicated. I mean, it was loyal. Not only could you edit and change infinitely and store, but it was dedicated. It was loyal. All right. Well, so here's me in 1983. It almost looks like I'm talking into an iPhone, but it's actually a dictation machine. And some of you'll remember the little tapes that were hard to get out of the machine without mangling the tape. All right. And so what do? I walk the tape back to a secretary who types out a first draft, who brings me that draft to mark up, who then adjusts the draft, hopefully to final. We print out, and because the delivery, the product was a written product, I was using 50-pound paper just to impress them and thick mailing envelopes and a custom printed label because it was the written product and package that was the deliverable. Everything, of course, was consolidated with 2-hole punches and files. All right. And so my main point here is that mediation, as we started in the early 80s, was a remarkably physical event. People are taking off work, they're driving across town, they're parking, they're walking up the stairs, they're waiting in the waiting room because it's so precious to schedule this time. We schedule 2 hours, we would use the 2 hours, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. What has happened over the past decades now is that mediation has incrementally become ever more digital as both an augmentation and option. Now, as an example of that very physical world, it was in the mid 80s that I built my yurt up on the hill in Eugene to go and mediate in. And lo and behold, it was a miracle environment. The very first case I had, the very difficult husband who was late and created a whole rut in my driveway as he drove up my gravel drive and slammed his door and came in and dropped all of his papers on the desk. And he looks around and he looks at the 6-foot skylight and he looks out the window. There's a little stream and we're surrounded by a beautiful forest and flowers. And he goes, I get it. And I said, you get what? And he says, people couldn't possibly fight up here. I said, you got it, And I think for mediators, state change or a little confusion is often kind of halfway. All right. We got to get them out of their rehearsed war status into considering new possibilities. Well, the super exciting thing for me is that even though we sold the yurt to the Cascade Raptor Center, and it's now the public greeting center for this Raptor Rehab Center in Eugene, I now use the yurt background when I'm mediating on Zoom. And by having that background, I'm able to share the story about how folks could not possibly fight in my mediation environment. And even though we're not physically in the yurt, the story still works. Okay? So here's a picture of John Healy and myself in younger days. John was really the absolute pioneer as he got ConflictNet going under the auspices of IGC, the Institute for Global Communication, and the Tides Foundation. And John, I met him in 1988 in Montreal at the NCPCR conference, and we had a mutual friend. And at that time, I had just gotten the job with the Academy of Family Mediators as their executive director, and I was being driven nuts by phone calls. Everybody was busy. I would have a mountain of pink slips. At best, you'd be talking to one person at a time, for example, and endless phone tag back and forth. Well, John went ahead and showed me this textual system. And back in the day, the modems were so slow, it was more like a ticker tape than a cohesive email. And he showed me these green monochrome characters creeping across the screen. And he said, yeah, you can send this information to anybody. And I said, so I can send it to one? Yeah. Can I send it to more than one? Yeah. They can respond to me? Yeah. Can they respond to one another? Yeah. We also had a bulletin board. So the concept was we could have an archive for important discussion so that late joiners could catch up, right? Well, John then successively shared with me imagery or pictures that painted themselves in top to bottom. And I'm looking at pictures now along with the text. We also, at this point, the text had gone from green to amber, you may remember. We also got colors, both the font and the background, different fonts, okay? All right, so that was all text. One day, John shows me imagery, pictures. And I go, this changes everything. And it did. And then another day, John says, listen to this. And we listen to an audio file. And now we can have audio on the internet? Wow. And then there was one day he said, you won't believe it. Watch the video. And of course, it was difficult and not very smooth, but nonetheless, we went from text to image to audio to video, and that is our continued palette of communications as we work online with one other dimension, either real-time communication or asynchronous communication. That's the digital communicational palette: text, image, audio, video, either real-time or asynchronous. And these are now the modalities that we use as we choreograph the communications. Now, as John and I would talk, we always were talking about whether we would ever find the Holy Grail. Would the online ever get so good that it would almost be as good as being there? And in fact, that many people would make a choice to save the money, save the time, and in fact, communicate online. And it turned out that Zoom was the Holy Grail that arrived at the perfect time for us with the pandemic. And then, as I already mentioned, the thing that's really hard to get our heads around is the pace of change, which I promise you is quicker now than it's ever been. So let's just really quickly review the disruptive technologies that have taken place. First one, as I mentioned, word processing. Critically, infinite editing, unlimited storage, fueled by ever-improving software. And you'll remember WordPerfect, some of you, you'll know Word and other software. And remember back in the day, there would be regular updates of the software, and we'd have to stuff in either a 5.25-inch disc or a 3.5-inch hard disk. There was a point where Word and WordPerfect had like 15 disks that you would need to successively jam into your machine to get it to update. And of course, if any single disk had a problem, you were dead in the water. And those were the days. But ever improving software on our PCs and our Macs, which were becoming ever more mobile. Okay, so we weren't necessarily tied to a particular location. Number two, disruptive technology is, in fact, the browser, because the browser holds all of the digital communications. It is the vehicle that lets us communicate text, image, audio, video, real time or asynchronous, and it's become so good. The browser environment is so good. Guess what? All of TV has moved onto the internet. You know, we started out by saying, could we be as good as TV? Well, TV caved. They're now on the internet. They rely on streaming services. Third major disruption, mobility. And not only mobility, but bandwidth. So that these phones, you know, things that we still call phones, even though we barely use the phone, these phones becoming smaller, more powerful, and remarkably, over a relatively short amount of time, we were in everybody's pocket or purse, and communications became personalized, which was a coup in the world of mediation. No longer are we sending things to an address or wondering who's listening to the answer machine. We're now able to have direct communications, be they text, image, audio, or video, right to a personalized communication device in everybody's pocket or purse. Fourth, the cloud. Okay, well, the cloud solved two major problems. One is updates. All right, no longer do we need to stuff all the disks into the computer. Now, all we need to do is remember to check for updates, or we get an email that says, check for updates. But updates are now done online, often automated in the background. We don't even know. And the other thing is backup. I don't know if any of you had the difficult experience of a computer crashing on you and losing all of your information, but that's really not an issue anymore with effective backup systems. All right, so my only point with this next slide is that there have been a series of incremental technical developments that have really replaced our old incorporeal physical mediation with digital options. And my only point I want to make here is that it was incremental progress over 30 plus years that had it that in the year 2000, excuse me, in the year 2020, when the pandemic hit, the front end of mediation had already been pretty effectively digitized. People were on email, they did attachments, they had websites. People would get information about mediation online. They'd find their mediator, they'd contact their mediator, they'd schedule. On the back end, the correspondence, the drafting, track changes, DocuSign, satisfaction surveys, both the front end and the back end of mediations were pretty darn effectively digitized even before the pandemic, okay? What happened with the pandemic is we lost the physical meeting. And remarkably, because of the digital progress that had been made and Zoom and Teams and other rich media platforms, we were able to find effective meeting surrogates to the physical meeting and barely missed a beat. You know, if the pandemic would have hit 10 years earlier, it would have been a very different situation. So, in fact, online mediation and Zoom rose to the occasion. Zoom, in fact, I would suggest proved as a simplification to be the holy grail. That in fact, the online was now just about as good as being there. We don't get the hot cup of coffee. We don't get the warm cookies. It's not quite as personal, but boy, oh boy, oh boy, what a miracle, particularly when we're wanting to bring mediation to the masses. Right? And exciting thing for me is even though we don't own the yurts anymore, I can still use the yurt as the background in my meetings. Okay. And then finally, we arrive at AI. And one of the commitments that we made at mediate.com and ODR.com is we need to responsibly use AI. We need to be aware of the risks and the dangers, and we need to address them and make it better and better and better. And that is one of the truths about AI is it keeps getting better. Okay. So whatever failings, whatever problems exist, we're actually able to address them. And an example is bias. Okay. Um, Bias in the system. Well, we know if we look at the physical world, for example, blacks, if you study the data, tend to do about 30% worse across the board relative to civil claims. Okay. Well, historically, how do you address that? Intriguingly, in our modern world with AI, while we may start out building some of these biases into our data set, we actually have the ability to track where is the bias coming from, track it down, and try to improve our system. We haven't had that ability previously. Now, really quickly, I want to just mention a few opportunities at mediate.com. We now have a monthly consultation group. We've already had 2 meetings, 5 more are already scheduled, called Dive into AI. For all of the meetings for the rest of for the ones that have taken place and the rest of them, I think the total cost is $100. We were trying to have it be very low. And you can either take part in the live meetings or watch the recorded videos. But every month for a solid hour, we're approaching a very specific topic in AI. For example, we did intake, was the first one. And Claire just did a really excellent one on chatbots. Okay. So they're very specific and very affordable. I do encourage you to consider joining this group. You can get up to speed by watching the videos, and I'm sure this will continue beyond this year. So a monthly consultation group. Secondly, for those of you that work in divorce, very recently in March, there was a remarkable conference, a 2-day, 12-hour conference that went over AI for every step of the divorce mediation process. And we had 19 different presenters. It's very much almost a TED Talk type of presentation, a lot of 15 and 30-minute presentations. Finally, I want to mention mediate.com is sponsoring a conference on October 8 and 9, specifically talking about elevating our standards in mediation now that AI is in. So what are the new AI standards? What are the ethical issues that we need to deal with? How can we assist people to become most competent relative to use of technology and AI? All of this stuff is at mediateuniversity.com and more. Okay. And you'll just see how committed we are to embracing AI and ensuring that we really do a most accountable and effective job with AI. At odr.com/AI, there's a wonderful document that Colin Rule and Claire Fowler put together. First of all, going through my list here of all the different ways AI can help us, and they've got a nice descriptive paragraph below each of them. And then additionally at this location, odr.com/AI, there's a review multi-page review of ethical issues that we're encountering and initial discussion of those. There are reviews by Colin and Claire of the different AI platforms, okay, including, for example, how secure they are and whether the data you submit is really protected or not. So some pretty important things. And then there's also a couple pages of sample prompts. What are the inquiries we might use with an AI engine to get best results? So that's about a 30-page document that is constantly being updated. It's a fantastic resource. Please take a look at that when you have a chance. All right. So now we're now shifting into present day. This is a point where if you do have great questions, feel free to add them in the chat. Nikki, I'll periodically be turning to you in that regard. But the first thing I want to say is, we all mediate differently. We have respective models of mediation that have evolved for most of us and that work best for us, and hopefully they're continuing to evolve. Just to illustrate one, not to try to persuade you or move you, but my model I call maximizing mediation. And it is 3 dimensions for me. I want to help people be at their individual best, and you can ask a question: how do they actually come to us in mediation? I would suggest, unless you are constructively intervening, they tend to come to us at their worst rather than their best. And the question is, do we want to work with them in that way? Or can we assist them to, in fact, be at their individual best? That's a goal for me. All right. Second, I have another goal of assisting the folks to work together to the extent they can. I tend to work in family areas, in the workplace, and the like, where continuing relations are a big deal. And so not only do I want them at their individual best, I want to do anything I can to create collaborative capacity, communicational capacity to improve their relationship as they move through the mediation and through life. And then finally, I have a goal of assisting each of them to get as much substantive satisfaction consistent with their interest as possible. I want this thing to be as good as it can be. And I'll clarify, I don't necessarily think that the goal of mediation is agreement, because for some participants, there's not enough on the table. Agreeing is not a good decision for them. For me, the goal of mediation, sure, ideally, let's reach agreement. But more than that is, what would be available to you in mediation, even though imperfect? Doesn't it make sense for us to identify the best you could get out of mediation before fully committing to World War III, which is kind of the option as most people see it? Okay, so I have found this approach, this framing, will keep people in the room. Doesn't it make sense, before you're going to be investing lots of money, lots of energy, lots of time, lots of stress? Doesn't it make sense to understand the most and the best that would be available in mediation before we commit, if you will, to battle mode, to World War III? And the main point I'm trying to make here is AI can help me with all of these aspects. Okay. It's not limited to the substantive issues. It can also help me empower the individual, excuse me, as well as assist the folks to work more capably together. So whatever your mediation model is, I want you to be open to the possibility that AI may help you on a number of facets to that model. Now, I'm not asking you to in any way accept my model, but in a very simplistic way, this is how I think about the strategy of moving people forward. I start out with interest-based option development, elicitive mediation, assisting them to do everything they can capably do, build rapport, gather information, make sure we have a best understanding of interest, options, motivations, identify any and all readily available agreements, perhaps even explore a few exchanges or package deals. This is the elicitive part of mediation. An even more simplistic model that I've heard strategically from a mediator, a guy named Jerry Spolter, who used to be with AAA, now with JAMS. And Jerry used to say, I spend the first half of the mediation earning mediator currency, and I spend the second half of the mediation spending my mediator currency. All right. So now, as we think about spending our mediator currency, I move into my second phase, hypothesis generation and testing. I also call it wonderment. Okay. And this is where the mediator becomes a bit more proactive. The folks have done everything they can kind of do on their own. So the mediator starts wondering, being curious, uh, asking whether perhaps something along these lines or some measure of, or might there be exchange here? Or can you imagine a package deal? And so, based on all their interests and knowing that people will not move to a new solution or any solution unless they can explain it to themselves. This brings up the importance of rationale. Okay, people will move. You ask them, well, why are you willing to do that now? They will never say, I don't know. Being able to explain to yourself and to significant others, because everybody's reporting to people, their ability to provide a rationale or set of rationalizations for why they're willing to move is a critical piece to get them to move. Okay, people will not move for no reason. Okay, finally, having elicited everything I can from them in problem solving mode, having become more proactive as mediator, wondering, curious, perhaps a bit of this, maybe start out and then shift. In addition to my more proactive mediator work, we will sometimes get to a point where we're on the 3-yard line, but we need to get across that goal line. And so my third phase is a comparative one. The fancy name is doubt and dissonance. I also call it heat. Okay. And this is where we would, in fact, sit down with them. It might be a mutualized heat discussion, vulnerabilities, cost, weaknesses, risks that they share. Or it might be separate caucus discussions about their respective individual vulnerabilities and costs and risks. But if necessary, we'll go to a point where we compare the imperfect set of solutions that are available in mediation with what's your other best option. And usually through this discussion, people will realize that, in fact, it probably is better to go with the available mediation solutions. And if not, I would ask them, well, what would make the difference? Because I sure want to be able to inform the other party if they were willing to move a bit more. We avoid World War III. Okay. So my main point here is everybody has got a strategic structure that we work through. And I'm going to suggest don't give up that structure just because of AI. Use AI within your proven comfortable structure to make it even better. All right. So here's my main AI concepts. And this is a point where if you do have questions or concerns, feel free to add them to the chat. So why is AI different? One is we find we can ask any question about anything to AI, make any request. Okay. That makes it different. It really is your new hardworking, I used to call it an intern or a set of interns. Now I call it my consultant or set of consultants, and very satisfying, works hard, never complains, is always cordial and polite. And at most, it's going to cost us $20 a month. Okay. So there's lots of positives. I already mentioned that AI provides kind of an additional voice or set of voices For example, I tend to do homework. When I do a meeting, I always have a piece of correspondence. I summarize progress seemingly made, attaching a most recent draft. I will then have homework, both sometimes mutual homework for everybody to do, as well as often specific homework questions for the individual. My ability to articulate specific questions that they might consider asking the AI engines in their downtime at no cost. Okay. That's a really helpful thing. And the fact that the information comes from a different voice, not my mediator voice, I think is helpful relative to perceptions of impartiality, neutrality, and the like. I mentioned natural language processing. That's the super cool thing. As we interface with these various AI platforms, we just talk to them like they're a person and we get the results we're looking for. Natural language processing. Another thing that's just blow away is the computing power now is so powerful, unfortunately at risk to our environment. So I'm going to acknowledge that. But it's so powerful that basically it can look at the entire internet and give us an answer in 20 to 30 seconds. It just blow away. Okay. But that's what it's able to do. Um, for example, in contrast to Google results, where they do a pretty good job organizing them by, greatest value, although they've got their monetary incentives for putting certain things up top and the like. But they would give you pretty good order of results. What AI does is it reads all the results, it integrates the information, and it spits out a user-friendly summary of what that information seems to be. And it really is a miracle. It's remarkable.
We have a couple
Finally,
questions, but
yes,
do you want to finish your main concepts, or do you want to answer a couple quick questions, or maybe not so quick?
let's go for, we'll make them quick.
All right. So, do you inform parties that you're using AI, and do you use it simultaneously while you're mediating on screen?
Okay. Very good question. And it has to do with ethically what they call transparency. Okay. And I think what you need to do is, and this is evolving. Okay. I think what we're finding is that mediators are going to use AI for all kinds of administrative tasks on the front end of the mediation. The first response to a client might well be AI generated, just as an example. And scheduling can be done by AI. Okay. So the administrative functions on the front end, it seems both in the law as well as in mediation there's a pretty high tolerance for letting AI help us with that. And also on the back end, for example, as we're perfecting our drafting for grammar, for could it be better stated and the like, people don't seem to have too much trouble with us using AI to polish up our work product. The question and the challenge is when we're talking about the meat of the mediation. Okay. Now I'm going to tell you, you're going to probably individually as a mediator be using the AI just to better inform yourself. Okay. To help you think about how you can be more effective at the next meeting. Um, that is different than asking the parties to go out to a platform 2 or 3 to get the information. All right. And what I would say there is if you're going to use AI with regard to the meat of the discussion, first of all, rarely would I do it in front of people. I've learned from 35 years of technical development, technology will often blow up on your face at the worst possible time. So it would typically be through homework assignments and then reviewing their effort at the homework and what did they come up with. But clearly the answer relative to using AI on the substance of the matter, I think, is transparency, and that we need to be accountable to our parties to the extent we're now bringing in this additional voice or voices to help us consider. Well, let me slip in a piece. Back in the day, before all this technology and AI, there would come a point in a mediation where the folks would run out of gas. They would get to, if you will, impasse. That's the whole reason they're there. If they could figure this out, they wouldn't be there. So they make all the progress they can. We ask some questions, and we get to a point, and it's clear that they're kind of stuck. All right. Well, back in the old days, it wouldn't be unusual for me to share what I might call normative stories, which are, hey, folks, good news. You're not the first ones to get divorced. You're not the first ones to have kids of this age with different interests and the like. Would you like to hear some solutions that have worked for similarly situated others? Not that you should do these things, but just to create more possibility. Never would I put out a single possibility. They're always plural. And not only would people be interested in this information of what worked for similarly situated others, as I would be providing the description of this possibility, they would be drooling out of their mouth. Because what I learned is people really don't need to prevail. They don't need to prevail and win to the loss of the other. They just want to not be dumb. They want to be smart. And so, as they're considering what are thoughtful, smart decisions, what similarly situated other people have done is remarkably valuable information. Now, I'm going to ignore the ethical issue of whether those normative stories need to be true or not. Okay? All right. But this was it. And so rather than me say, would you like to hear from me solutions that have worked for others? I can now say, here's some homework. Run it by ChatGPT, run it by Claude, run it by your favorite AI platform, and I'll look forward to hearing what you come up with. Okay. So intriguingly, they're able to access this information not from the mediator necessarily. These things are not mutually exclusive, but they can in fact be resourceful and go out there and often source that information. So the answer to the question is, when we're getting into the substance of the dispute, I do think we need full disclosure and transparency, and then use the platforms as an available idea generator. They don't control anything, but they can help us think about what might work. Okay. Nikki, you got a second question?
I have a quick follow-up on that. I
Okay.
think I'm going to combine a couple of questions, but do you feel the need to warn parties when you give this kind of a homework assignment about the potential of hallucination? And then also, do you see a different sort of an impact with a mediator suggestion or a suggestion being generated from an AI source on the parties themselves?
Um, I would warn, and we could bias and hallucinate, So yeah, it's just ideas. Okay, it's not what's right. It's just ideas. Okay. So yes, I would, I think, warn them about that. But I'll tell you the better reality. See, I initially thought that I, as mediator, was going to be explaining AI to everybody. Okay, it's actually not that case. As often as not, they've already consulted AI. In fact, more typically, one of them is relatively expert on AI, and the other one just doesn't want to have to deal with it, because you get that. All right. So the critical piece, I think, is that you and we as mediators are able to have a capable, sophisticated discussion with them about and we need to meet them where they are as they come in. So that's, if for no other reason, your ability to have a capable discussion with them about AI and what they're familiar with, what they're not, what they're scared of, etc. We need to be able to meet them where they are in terms of the AI discussion. That's the even bigger piece than being concerned, because I'm going to constantly remind them, You decide everything. Everything else is just possibilities. Whether I say it, AI says it, you're in charge. Okay. I find AI to be the greatest empowering opportunity that we've ever come across for participants. Okay. And I agree, we don't want it to take over, we don't want it to be directive, but in terms of what has worked for others, it's brilliant. Okay.
Great.
All right, I'm going to keep going through the list really quickly. All right. One of the great risks with AI is the sharing of personal identifying information. And um, sometimes we have what are called large language models where it's going out there into the internet. One of the reasons you may want to upgrade, for example, your Chat GPT to the paid model, $20 a month, 4.0 model, is because you can put walls around your information. You can have a private GPT, okay? In fact, remarkably, you could develop it and then allow people to subscribe to it. Some of you may be familiar with John Landy. In fact, John has a presentation at 8 o'clock this morning for me. It would be, I think, 11 for the folks on the East Coast, talking about his development of his own private GPT and really something worth considering. Okay. I'm going to keep moving here. All right. And how are we doing on time?
About a half
6:30?
an hour. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Perfect. It's always perfect, whatever amount it is. There's three main platforms I've checked out. I encourage you just to play with them. You can play for free. Talked about meeting them where they're at. Talked about the similarity of mediation questioning and AI prompting. Talked about AI as a idea generator. Never ask for a single answer. Always ask for answers in the plural. We're going to very quickly now be moving into the issues of balancing automation, AI, and the human touch. And I'll introduce very quickly the Turing test. The Turing test is actually kind of a laudable test for online platform. And it is, can you make your online platform so good that participants, users are satisfied and they actually don't even know whether it's a computer or a person because they're happy. They were assisted. So if we're going to change an, excuse me, an airplane ticket, we do that online. There's no human involved. We don't care that there's no human involved. We'd rather the computer do it because it's probably going to be durable then and it'll stick. We're also finding that, for example, for purposes of resolving traffic tickets, for purposes of resolving property tax disputes, where the issues are relatively simple and clear, that in fact, we can now have a computer resolving the majority of those disputes without human intervention. And we're going to come back to that point. Um, I mentioned already AI steadily improving. One of the cool things is we do have the ability to hunt down bias, hallucinations, because we can always identify now the source from where that goofy idea came, and we can go ahead and improve our data set. Only limit on the use of AI is your own imagination. Okay. So very quickly, I'm going to describe four platforms and show you an example with ChatGPT. I already talked about ChatGPT helping me with the obituaries. Notebook LM is from Google, and it's really remarkable. It was developed to help people learn stuff like when you're in law school or in med school. And there's a variety of textual outputs. So a brief, a FAQ, a timeline, a study guide, etc. I'll show you that. A variety of text outputs, but also an audio output. And the super cool thing about Notebook LM audio output is it really gives an even-handed, comprehensive treatment of the content because from its perspective, it's helping you to best learn the content. If you compare that with a regular human podcast, they tend to go off on tangents And they really don't, in an even-handed, best learning way, go through the content. Notebook LM does that. I'll show you. Ojai, I'm going to show you, this is like having an avatar for a secretary, and it's mind-boggling for purposes of communicating to people, coming up with first drafts of emails, for purposes of scheduling, for purposes of making payment, requesting payment, all the little administrative tasks. That's Ojai. And then Pickaxe is really cool, particularly if you're trying to develop forms, like smart forms that people would fill out, that while you're sleeping, you can have intelligent responses to those. Also, for purposes of developing your own chatbot, Pickaxe is remarkably easy to use. All right. So very quickly, here's ChatGPT. Notice ask anything. Okay. And you can not only ask for textual responses, you can ask it to create an image, search the web, write code, do even deep research. Okay. You can ask Chat GPT anything. All right. We're going to come back to that. Notebook LM, again, very helpful in reviewing documents. These are the different specific things it can do. If you have a complex case and you're looking to summarize documents, compare documents, Notebook LM is also very fantastic at that. Okay. Here's Notebook LM, and what I'm showing here is the ability to submit multiple data sources. Okay. And here I have a PDF, and then I have 2 YouTube videos. You can use PDFs, YouTube videos, a web page as your source material. Does Notebook LM watch the videos? No. It converts them to a transcript, and then it reads this transcript. And one of the pieces it will always give us is a summary of those. That's what you see to the right, is a summary. Now here with Notebook LM is my audio overview interface. Down here we see study guide, briefing document, FAQ, timeline as print options, textual output, or I can have a conversation and create that. And now let me go to my next page. This is the page, and this is a prompt box, okay? I can go ahead, and I've learned that when you're asking, for example, for an AI podcast, you want to identify who's the audience, okay? What's the context of the request, and what's the action you'd like the user to take. Those are 3 things that I try to always remember. Now, I would put in my prompts and look at the very bottom. It dawned on me, I didn't really know what was the best prompting for Notebook LM. Maybe I can go ask ChatGPT. Could they help me develop my prompts for Notebook LM? ChatGPT says, sure, no problem. What do you want? Okay. So the lesson here is you can use more than one AI platform. And I'll oftentimes ask ChatGPT how I can best work with another platform. Okay. I've now converted over 100 of our best articles at mediate.com to audio AI podcasts, and they're remarkable. In fact, I'm going back. I've done most of our recent stuff. I'm now going through 30 years of content and identifying some of our most powerful pieces. And it's super cool to give them now an audio podcast option. It kind of dusts off, the old stuff, and it gives it a modernized feel. I love the podcast for my daily walk and bike ride, and also when I'm cleaning the house. Okay. There's a lot to say for the audio delivery, particularly because it is so capable and comprehensive. Now, Notebook LM is now finding competitors, and JellyPod, for example, lets you select from different voices for your podcast. You can have different numbers of hosts. You can clone your own voice and have yourself be the AI host. You can create custom fictional individuals if you want. And the really cool thing is that once you have your first edition of your podcast, you can have a transcript printed out and you can edit the audio podcast just by adjusting the textual transcript. Pretty cool. Gen FM is another new one. Notice 32 different languages. All right. And it also has the ability, for example, to either add or subtract things like ums and ahs that actually make it a little bit more human. So just an example of what's happening. This is Ojai, okay? So this is where we have an avatar that is always respectful and nice to us. Basically, we create an identity for them. We give them an email address. And then either by email or audio, just by us sending an audio message to them, we can ask them to do what we want them to do. We can ask them to send an initial response to this client. Would you please develop that draft, have it ready for me within the hour? We can have it schedule, we can have it bill, we can have it make payment. It's kind of like a secretary. And I was blown away by it, far superior to the other just general practice administrative platforms. Pickaxe is also very cool. They talk about scaling yourself so that even though you're sleeping, that you can still get quality content responses to people. Here's the options with them, most notably smart forms and chatbots. And this is the interface, and you can see you describe in natural language what you want this chatbot to do. This chatbot is intended to most capably provide information about mediation, including assisting users to identify mediators who may be able to best serve them, either locally or online. And then I say the chatbot should consult all of the content available in this directory. And then I give it mediate.com's directory that has our 17,000 articles. Okay. Now that's just an example. I could have it look at AFCC's journal that's been in existence for 40 years, for example. I can ask it to consult other things. I can ask it to ignore certain things, all with natural language. One little trick of the trade I've learned is, particularly for free platforms, they don't necessarily remember your prompting, and that you're really smart to copy your prompting, paste it into Word, just so you have it, so that next time you want to make it even better, you don't lose it. You don't have to start from scratch. Okay. All right. So at one point I said, "Hey, ChatGPT." My read is that this online mediation is really a combination of automation, AI, and what I'm going to call the human touch. Could you create me a Venn diagram? I even gave it the colors I preferred. And this was literally the first draft it came up with. Now, I haven't yet been successful doing the next piece, which is adding arrows that would show all of these circles moving together. And really the Turing test, can you make your online platform so good that the user can't even tell whether it's a robot or a human? That would really say that the circles are fully overlapping. Okay. And I'm going to suggest to you this is happening. AI is becoming and automation are becoming ever more present. And there is a meaningful question. How do we make sure the humanity of our mediation services continues? Well, I went ahead and this for me is the Turing test. Do we accomplish desired human touch if a participant is fully satisfied and can't tell whether it's a human or AI that's assisting? If it's a traffic ticket, changing a plane reservation, maybe getting an acceptable result on property tax. I think we're okay with that. When you get into more complex relational, emotional disputes, maybe not so much, right? Well, I went ahead and I asked ChatGPT, will we ever get to a point where our online systems are so good that people will be satisfied, whether it's a computer or a person? I'm just asking an innocent question. Here's what ChatGPT says. And notice the quotes. This is all, I didn't change a single word here. Okay. Here's a grounded forecast, ChatGPT says. And it says, this is what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. And again, this you can't read it all what I'm going to be showing you. So you may want to get a copy of the PDF of this. But it gives me a projection for the short term, for the next 5 to 10 years. And it talks about how things will get better, more and more human-like. Then it says, here's what I see for 10 to 20 years. And it talks that these systems will be conversationally fluid, able to simulate empathy, equipped with to handle procedural fairness, capable of adapting tone and language, okay? So getting better. Now here's what's going to happen 20 years and plus. And notice at the end, they say, hey, there's still going to be a place for human mediators, and especially when emotionality, empathy, cultural, etc., power, so there's still appeasing us, at least, that we're going to be valuable. And then I thought it was interesting that ChatGPT said, I have a final thought. Okay. I'd love to ask Bob Bergman, he might chime in here, whether these platforms actually think. Okay. I don't think thinking is how they process. But anyhow, ChatGPT says a final thought, and they say it's not AI versus human, but it's the both of us together. And sometimes the AI will be human enough. Then, without my prompting, ChatGPT says, would you like me to draft up a framework outlining this whole thing that would include safeguards of fairness and accountability? I said, yeah, you know, 30 seconds later, I get a complete draft framework for building a Turing test passed online system. So the system architecture with the conversation engine, and then it goes through the additional components that we would have. And then it has safeguards for fairness and accountability. I mean, it spits this out, and I'm blown away. I could not have come up with this with a month of work. I showed this to Colin. He said, wow, this is amazing. Key features to simulate the human touch, potential use cases for early adoption. Okay. And then here's the critical piece, and the piece I'll end on: welcome questions and conversations. Then again, without my prompting, ChatGPT says, if you want, I can develop a user flow diagram or sketch to illustrate how participants would take advantage of the system. Should it? Sure, go ahead. And this is the graph it came up with. And a light bulb went off in my head when I saw that human mediator handoff, okay? Because I've been trying to sell these systems to courts and to agencies, the segments of our society that are most technically phobic, all right? I mean, they're really about the only area of our society that hasn't had the internet wash through it. And so as courts and judges are thinking about, wow, should we do this online mediation? Should we include AI, etc.? A light bulb went off in my head. And I came to understand that the thing that will make it safe for courts and agencies and users to embrace online platforms, including AI, is that if at any point they're not comfortable, they're not satisfied, for any reason or no reason, we need to give them an ever-present button that takes them to human assistance. All right. Now, they say a human mediator handoff. I actually believe that people are going to get started in mediation and then they may need some help along the way. I believe there's going to be a new role. I call it an MIS, a mediation information specialist. Very specifically, not the person that would mediate their actual case, but somebody that would be available. It may be in real time, it may be by a near term appointment, but somebody that would be available, for example, for a half an hour for $50. Who pays that money? It might be the court or agency because it's worth it, or it might be the individual. But the concept is that there's always a readily available human being to answer their questions, to help them think through whether mediation is right for them, and if so, how they might best find a mediator. Because right now, the decision to mediate is kind of a leap. It's a jump. It's a big decision that people are not going to be prepared to make if they've got uncertainty and the like. So, as we're selling these new platforms to the courts, which are finally coming around, I'm convinced the thing that will make it safe for courts, for agencies, for organizations, and for individual users is that if the online platform is not working in a comfortable, effective way, they have the ability to get some human assistance. Paradoxically, ironically, I'm convinced it is the readily available human assistance that will make our next move into online platforms, including AI, safe and reasonable and comfortable. And that's all I got. So I
Perfect
welcome
timing.
questions.
Yeah, there's about 10 minutes or 8 minutes left for questions. Atta, we'll go to you since you have your hand raised, and then there's some in the chat that I can ask after. But Atta,
Hello, Jim. Thank you for your presentation. So I've been working and thinking about this. So I wanted to ask a few questions. So the EU AI Act is the first AI Act in the world, and it has an annex to Article 6 and mentions alternative dispute resolution, just like judicial. It's at the same stage for being high risk, and it should not make the decision making and all kind of things. But as we know, there is the AI integration in ODR, and mediation should be used in AI. So I also support it should be assisting in like hybrid kind of model in my article I'm writing. But in the future, as you said, the future will be the mediator making decision, or when we try to optimize as much, maybe the most, as you stressed, the optimized solution can come from the AI. So then we should also think whether it's a decision by the AI, like Silicon Valley or CR also said about arbitration. So what should we do? And for European market, would there be some um, uh, it would interrupt in entrance to European market? And second thing in my mind is about enforceability. So I'm conducting empirical research in space industry and use of alternative dispute resolution and arbitration litigation. And when I ask about mediation, the first thing they say, oh, it's not as enforceable. They have quite doubts. In Europe, it's not party to even not signed the Singapore Convention, United States as well. I'm originally from Turkey. Turkey is a party, but we are not many parties there. So, and then when its enforceability is a question, and if AI also comes into play, would parties have more doubts about the enforceability of mediation? Because if it goes to courts or something for enforcing those kind of settlement agreements. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're properly highlighting a world of difference between using AI and mediation and using AI to help a judge make a decision or an arbitrator make a decision. Now, um, it's not a perfectly clean world here. For example, one of the AI platforms that I am attempting to convince AAA to support me in developing is a best interest of the child platform for purposes of divorce cases. That's kind of the standard throughout the states and in most international countries. What's in the best interest of the child? Well, if we develop an AI platform that judges consult, or perhaps even a parenting arbitrator or parenting coordinator, for example, it becomes a little bit more controversial, trepidatious. If there's bias, in that system, it's not going to be perfect for sure. But think about comparing it. Would I rather have a judge able to consult a really well-developed AI platform regarding the best interests of a child, where I have all the AFCC journal articles, I've got all of their additional current content, I've curated all the mediate.com articles and included the best, and I have a task force that helps me identify additional resources. Okay. So we have a highly valuable yet imperfect, somewhat biased platform. Would we rather have judges and arbitrators consulting that, noting that it's not perfect, noting they may want to do additional research or inquiry, or would we have them be oblivious to that and make their decisions, based upon their own marriage or their own divorce, or, how they treated their kids, even though their kids never talked to them, anymore. So this is a more intriguing and controversial area where courts and arbitrators would be using AI platforms to give them ideas and direction about a best decision. Fortunately, in the world of mediation, where I'm willing to give myself the gift of exclusively focusing, I don't think we have that issue. Yes, we need to disclose. Yes, we need to be transparent. But our part of our transparent is this is just an idea generator. You decide everything. If you don't like it, don't do it. Okay. So the development of AI engines for consideration is actually, I think, much safer in the world of mediation. And we do need to come up with proper protocols, even in mediation, for warning folks. It gets more dicey and controversial as we start thinking about AI engines being used by actual decision makers like judges, arbitrators. So I'm not there yet. I'm focused on the mediation part, and I love it just because I actually think it's our best vehicle for assisting participants to empower themselves. That's the cool things. And in fact, expedite the mediation as well. I see
Great.
John Landy just
Thank you
entered.
very much for your answer.
And John, there was actually a question about your forthcoming talk. If you could do a little self promo, I don't know if you're able to come on mic. There were people asking when and where they could join. I think you were talking about creating and a bespoke chatbot or agent,
Private GPT.
private GPT. Too Socratic of a message for this kind of a format, but we will try and follow up, or you can search for the private GPT and John Landy online.
It's
Jim,
known as RPS. John calls it the RPS.
excellent. I will look and see if I can find something easily linkable, but RPS private GPT talk forthcoming. There were a couple questions about one, if you set the universe for an AI, can you rule out hallucinations, and also even with the same prompt at different times, sometimes you get a different response. Can you address that?
Um, yeah, we're getting better at ruling out, getting rid of hallucinations because of our ability to track down sources. Okay. And second question, real quickly again, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think that addresses both. It was just with a set kind of universe, like you're only accessing the mediate.com archives. Will you still encounter things that are hallucinations, and how can you help to rule that out if that's the case?
Um, you will. It's going to be imperfect. You absolutely need to take ownership over what you actually let go to the clients and the like. I'm finding the coolest thing about these platforms is they're readily improvable, which is in contrast to real life. Okay, so it is an issue. You need to take ownership for the final output that goes to the clients because there will be occasional mistakes there.
Well, I think there's a million other questions, but we've come to the point where the official talk ends. So I'd like to thank you so much for this truly engaging and informative talk. We could talk forever, and you'll see in the comments afterwards all the praise and thanks and questions that we didn't get to. But thank you so much for joining us and for sharing what you've been working on.
Well, thank you all. And I think it's a super exciting time for the world of mediation. It's going to really help us work more capably with parties to get more satisfying agreements. I'm convinced of it.
On behalf of all of us, thank you. I want to echo Nikki's gratitude for your amazing presentation. That was both a trip down memory lane, which was amazing, and a peek at the present and the future. Everyone, we will be meeting on the first Thursday in August, and our presenter will be Susan Levin, who is on this call, I see, who will be talking about neuroscience. Look forward to seeing everyone in August. We have officially ended this morning's call. Thank you, everyone, and see you next month.